just as our souls, being air, holds us together, so pneuma and air encompasses and guards the whole world. Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same: spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. And today, we're going to look at Anaximenes, last teacher from the Milesian school, which includes Thales and Anaximander. Those guys we've gone over already. And just to remind you, the thing that the pre-Socratic philosophers of the Milesian school, what they did that was so important and had never been done before, was they started looking for rational explanations for everyday phenomenon instead of turning towards the gods. And then you see Maddie over there. We're doing some off-leash training today. It's not a whole lot of population here, but she's doing really, really good. Anyways, so similar to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, who come later during the classical era in Greece, in the Archaic age, we see three famous teachers: Thales, Anaximander, and today, Anaximenes. Anaximenes was active in the last half of the 6th century. And unfortunately, his life, like the actual details of his life, have remained obscure to us because none of his works survive to this day. However, a lot of modern scholars believe that he was actually more influential during his time than Anaximander or Thales was. And his intellectual heirs, like Aristotle, have helped to preserve his memory by at least talking about the ideas that he came up with. Hey, how are y'all? So Anaximenes was the final master of the Milesian school of philosophy, continuing Thales and Anaximander's work. And like his predecessors, Anaximenes sought the arche, or underlying physical principles of the cosmos. Now remember, Thales had decided that water was the universal principle, and Anaximander suggested that the apeiron, which was kind of like it's an indefinite aether-like material. Now Anaximenes counters by saying that air, or A-E-R, air, was it. And he also has a good quote: "The mighty main sea is the begetter of clouds and winds and rivers, Anaximenes," which is actually a pretty smart thing. Like, obviously we all know about the water cycle today and how streams and the ocean and all that stuff play into the formation of clouds, but that connection is not obvious if you've never heard about it before. So the dude was pretty smart, clearly. And Anaximander was also the first philosopher to use the Greek word pneuma as a synonym for air, which I actually know the word pneuma mostly from the Bible. It was very popular back then, or is used almost as breath of life. It's almost like air, but with a vital principle in it, as in like something that makes things alive, right? Now, similar to his forebears Thales and Anaximander, his ideas may have been a little off the mark, but how he derived them was revolutionary. He really did start to use rational principles to come up with his ideas. And he based his idea of air being the underlying principle of the world off of the naturally occurring water cycle. Again, he's one of the first people, I dropped my pen, to really start talking about these things, or like really trying to explain them. And he did notice that clouds created the rain, and that fed into the water, which evaporated. And he has actually a pretty sophisticated he has a pretty sophisticated system of explanations involving the different densities of air and materials and how that changes things, but I won't go into all of the details. However, in his cosmology, Earth itself was an early condensate of air. And as air cooled and condensed, it would form solids and liquids. So not only did he discover the water cycle, he also started talking about phase changes, like going from a solid to a liquid, or from a liquid to a gas, which is another impressive step. As far as, it's an idea. Obviously, we all know that ice melts and becomes water, and it's actually water the whole time. That's not necessarily obvious if you've never heard about it before, though. And he postulated that that's what was going on. Now, he wasn't the first guy to ever recognize phase shifts, but he was the first to associate them with changes to an object's density. So, he recognized that the density of an object was changing, and it had something to do with its phase state. Hold on. Earthquakes are caused, in his cosmology also, earthquakes were caused by either a lack of moisture or a superabundance of water, which can both break apart the Earth's crust. And when clouds rip apart violently, lightning would explode between them. Again, this guy was really looking at natural phenomenon and trying hard to come up with rational explanations for what was causing them. Almost scientific. Hashtag almost scientific. Rainbows are formed when dense air is touched by sunlight. Now that one wasn't far from the truth. Brilliant, insightful, groundbreaking. There's a ton of words that you could use to describe Anaximenes for sure. But one of the ones that stood out to me the most is how he connected the ideas of expansion with hot air and compression with cold air, because he realized that if he opened his mouth wide and blew out, like on his palm, versus pursing his lips, it changed the temperature of the air that touched his palm. And so he connected expansion with heat and compression with cold. And that's something that's like, very close to an actual scientific experiment. Again, none of this stuff's that impressive to us today because of the technology we have now, but this stuff was done before they had any of these concepts, which is always impressive to me. For the first time, a Western philosopher had formalized a rational theory explaining how substances can change forms. He may have been the most influential pre-Socratic philosopher of all in his own time, and his theories go on to influence Plato and Aristotle, and through those guys, all of Western philosophy. So he's definitely had a real impact on everything we do today in our culture. And tomorrow we'll talk about Pythagoras, who honestly is an even more interesting figure to me, because he obviously we'll talk more about it tomorrow, but he basically finds a cult that worships numbers for their mystical powers. And Aristotle and Plato say that his biggest contribution to the world was a new way of life, because he kind of finds like a monastery. I don't know. Anyways, it's a pretty interesting tale, and it definitely deserves a video of its own. But that is the last of the pre-Socratic philosophers. Or after we talk about Pythagoras, we'll be moving on to the Peloponnesian War in Greece, which is after Athens expels Persia from their, or Athens and Sparta expel Persia. Instead of teaming up and creating like a greater Greece, they go to war with each other. Very human tale, but it's a pretty cool, interesting story. Anyways, for the rest of the winter, it's not that I won't be traveling at all, but my radius and circumference are going to be much smaller. I've got to turn my attention towards more pressing adult matters, and those will be, it's going to be fun. I still get to skateboard and walk around a lot. I think my left foot's starting to finally kind of heal up all the way. If I have two recommendations to make as far as places to visit out of everywhere that I saw this summer, I would say Pictured Rocks in Michigan and Acadia National Park in Maine. Both of them places were particularly cool. But that's all I've got for you guys today. This is a wandering author here, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. As always, my message remains the same. Spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. What are y'all doing in order to inspire, uplift, and empower your community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. Till next time, I love y'all.